evening. Good evening, sisters. I hope you're all well and welcome to Let's Talk. This is the Misogyny and Policing event, and welcome to all attendees. I see some old faces, fellow graduates of the LWN in the room, and also to newcomers who might be your first meeting. We're really pleased to have you here, and we've got a great event planned for you tonight. So by way of introduction, thank you to Cllr, who already gave me quite a humbling introduction. My name's Sophia James. I was a local councillor in Reading, first Black woman, and I served as the lead councillor for neighbourhoods and communities, so I had the remit, and part of which was scrutiny of the Police and Crime Commission and interacting with the local police. Currently the CLP chair, I've also organised Black Lives Matters and Reclaim the Night events, so I've had my fair share of dealings with them, and also on a personal level as well. So before we kick off, I'd like to echo that there are some sensitive subjects that will be discussed tonight, such as sexual assault. So please, if at any point you feel the need to take a moment, please feel free to take it, and let us know if you need any support. Use the chat tonight. We want lots of discussion, but please keep it comradely, sisterly. We'll be hearing from the panel first, and then we'll make sure there's plenty of time for discussions, questions, and comments. And please also share the word on social media. It's hashtag LWN, Let's Talk, and do sign up for the other events as well. But back to the issue, I think we can all say this is a watershed moment for British policing. The Casey report confirmed what we all knew, that the Metropolitan Police had an issue with systematic sexism, racism, and homophobia. Now, an average Met Police complaint takes 400 days to conclude, with discrimination cases far less likely to be upheld. So how can we have faith in the police as the public when 1 in 3 women employees and officers report sexism in the workplace, and 60% of those complaints return with no case to answer? However, this problem isn't specific to the Met. I think we've seen a clambering over recent years as police forces go to acknowledge their failings. And recently, the Chief Constable of Police Scotland admitted his force was over institutionally racist and discriminatory, with lots of reports of sexism. The crime survey in England and Wales has identified significant drops in public confidence in policing over the last 5 years. And it's really easy to understand why, from Child Q and Sarah Everard, Reneem O'Day and Carla Salim, Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, and the disgraceful case of Carrick abusing his badge to abuse and commit over 85 offences. Below these high-profile cases sits victim-blaming messages, shameful banter, and a pretty dysfunctional vetting system for police officers. The knock-on effect is that sexual violence survivors are dropping out of police processes at a higher rate than before due to perceptions and poor treatment. And this all comes at a time when sexual offences are at a record high, and only 1% of rapes recorded results in a charge. As a Black woman, I've had, as you can imagine, some very mixed experiences with the police, from the negative experiences of stop and search to hostile policing at demonstrations, but also to some collaborative efforts locally with neighbourhood teams, and even an arrest after unwanted touching on public transport, which is an unusually, I'm sad to say, positive result to have. But let's face it, officers are a bit of a badge lottery because they're forced to systematically reward bad behaviour. Now, sisters, tonight isn't just about defining the problem. Tonight is our opportunity to contribute to solutions. So this evening, we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion about what happens when Labour win the next general election, and what our future Labour government can do to clean up police and keep women and girls safe. So over to our expert panel. And first up, we'll have Sarah Jones, who's a Croydon Central MP and Shadow Minister for Policing and Fire Service. Sarah led the response to Grenfell and delivered London 2012. Sarah, I'll come to you in a second. I'll also introduce Shaista as well. So Councillor Shaista Aziz, Oxford City Councillor and Cabinet Member for Safe Communities, former journalist and founding member of the Three Hijabis campaign against sexism and racism in football. We will also be joined by Jess Phillips MP. Cllr, has she arrived quite yet? Not yet, so, but as you'll know, I'm sure she won't need any introduction, but she will shortly be joining us. That's the MP for Yardley and the Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding. But Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Fee, for that introduction, and thanks for chairing this event. I'm going to try and stick to the kind of policing, well, to the policing elements, the kind of expertise that I have, so that when Jess arrives, we don't overlap and she talks about the things that that she's really strong on. I just want to delve first into Casey a little bit, just to give some of the context in her report, because I think it's really important. So she began her review obviously after the murder of Sarah Everard, and the lifespan of the review was bookended by the charge and conviction of David Carrick, one of the most prolific sex offenders that we have seen. And it's worth just highlighting the fact that there were some very strong women in the middle of those two cases, and one wouldn't have happened without the other. So there was a victim of David Carrick who listened to Sarah Everard's mother's victim impact statement, and she was so moved by that statement that she came forward to the police, which then meant other people came forward too, and meant that David Carrick was convicted. So it shows the immense bravery of women in the middle of this horror. The review took a year, and it was incredibly detailed, 300 pages, more work, I think, into this area than any other report of its kind. And it's important to say that Louise Casey is pro-police. She believes that policing encourages the very best in society, but she also recognises and is frustrated because she doesn't think that the police recognise that policing also encourages the very worst, and that we have to be prepared for that, and that we have to have systems in place to tackle it. Her report is this kind of tour de force, 300 pages long, with great rigour. Now, all of the headlines you will have seen about the horrific misogyny, the lack of vetting, the lack of standards, the lack of oversight, the lack of care for women is there. But there are other aspects of it that are really important, because they sit alongside it, and we can't tackle one without the other. So the first is that Louise talks in detail about how austerity has disfigured the Met. She uses the word disfigured, which I think is really interesting. The kind of huge cuts that we've seen, 20% cuts to civilian staff, 2/3 of, oh, that might be Jess on the train. 2/3 of our special constables have gone, half of our PCSOs. Huge impact that's had on the police's ability to do the job. The nature of crime really changing as well. A lot of very complex child sexual exploitation cases coming forward that take huge resource, violence going up, other crimes going down, and this massive non-demand crime as well. So the police dealing with issues like mental health, so sucking the resources out of what they should be doing. Other elements that Louise draws on that other organisations have had similar problems with is issues like the lack of curiosity in policing. You look at the Stephen Port murders, where there were multiple murders of young men, and the police didn't question why and what was happening, and assumed these were suicides, and that's been an issue all the way throughout. Also, the fundamental withdrawal of neighbourhood policing, so the police not policing our local neighbourhoods anymore. All these things sit alongside that real lack of a proper culture and a real lack of proper systems within the Met that have got us to where we are today. And it's important because we can't fix one thing without fixing the other. We have to police properly in order to increase confidence, and we have to tackle the misogyny and the culture and the racism, the sexism, misogyny that Louise Casey identified. And the wider context is, of course, we've seen reports like this in other areas, much less reported, but the fire service has had a very similar report come out recently, where huge examples of real horrible culture exposed, and we've seen it obviously in the army, and we've seen it in other organisations too. So it's important, because what Louise does is she then steps back and she says, look, there are systematic issues here of leadership, of management, of culture, of integrity, of vetting, of misconduct. They all need fixing, and we're not short of recommendations as to what needs to be done. She has a whole raft of recommendations. So do other structures and organisations. The Inspectorate has done a massive review of vetting, huge number of recommendations, said it's absolutely awful. You know, bad people can get into the police, they can stay in the police. You know, that's from Her Majesty's Inspectorate, which is not the most sort of, you know, woke organisation in the world. Do you know what I mean? But they've seen and they've investigated and they've concluded. So is the Independent Office for Police Conduct, and so have others done reviews. So what Labour wants to do is to be a much more active Home Office, a much more active and interventionist centre driving reform. So at the moment, you can have good vetting in one police force, terrible vetting in another, and that can't be right. There's a real postcode lottery across all those 43 police forces. So having national standards of conduct, vetting, and misconduct, standards of training as well, is really, really key. So there are some things you can do that are straightforward. You can say if an officer is accused of some kind of sexual abuse or domestic abuse, he needs to be suspended. You can make those kind of changes and you can force them across all of the organisations, all of the structures within the police. You can introduce proper standards around vetting, so have proper teams that are proper funded. There are systematic things you can do. But the leadership that will go with culture change is the really tricky thing to nail, because you can change the structures and you can change the systems, but unless the leadership is there as well, it's not going to work. Louise Casey put the Met on notice, gave them 2 years, and we've got a new commissioner, and he's been given basically 2 years to try and turn this around. We hope that if touchwood Labour get in, we will introduce national standards that will mean that the whole structure of policing shifts and changes, but that leadership will have to be there. And a lot of that is about having more women in policing and more women in senior positions in policing as well. I heard Caroline Noakes on the Today programme this morning talking about Parliament and talking about the problems we still have, but saying compared to 12 years ago when she was first elected, it's transformed because there are a lot more women in that space. And we need to see that in policing. When you have 1 or 2 women in a team, you have much more problems, which is why the diplomatic, the protection teams in Parliament and those who hold firearms are particularly identified in Louise Casey's report as particularly bad, because there's hardly any women in the team, and that's part of how these cultures are allowed to continue. I'm aware of time, so I should probably stop, but I've kept my contribution to what can be done within the structures of policing, because I think that's really important. And I think Jess will talk possibly more widely about victims and about some of the wider issues around violence against women and girls as well, if she's here.
Thank you, Sarah, for some excellent opening remarks. And also I thoroughly agree with the national standards. I think they're desperately needed. Jess has arrived. So Jess, apologies, I introduced you earlier, but I don't believe you need an introduction. We're really pleased to have you. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thanks. So sorry I was late. I got stuck on a train, and then when I got in, I'm not going to lie, I had to set up my computer where there was a fan pointing at me and an open window, because the heat is intolerable. London, if you're not in London, count yourselves very lucky, is all I'm going to say. London is the pits in the heat. As I'm sure Sarah has already said about the Labour Party's movements around standards and in policing and all that comes with that, and that is vitally important and will make a massive difference. I suppose for me, that I've never known, and I've worked with many different police forces for over 20 years now, and I've never known trust and confidence in the police to be so low amongst women. I mean, it's not always been perfect, but I mean, I had the vivid memory of just a friend of mine coming out. We were coming out of a pub on my 40th birthday, in fact, and there were some coppers outside, and she properly was telling them how let down she felt, like how she didn't feel safe. And I was like really, really, really shocked by this sort of attitude that definitely has become pervasive. And the trouble is, is that in the line of work that I work in, you know, young women who've been exploited, well, any women who've been exploited, sexually abused, victims of domestic violence or human trafficking, they don't have the privilege of not being able to trust the police. That's a privilege that, and you know, I understand everybody's firm activism, and I suppose women are catching up with black people who felt this way for quite some time, but they don't have the privilege of not being able to trust them. They have no choice but to have to call them in many situations. And so we find ourselves in a position where we have to make sure that that consent is brought back. Now, for me, the concerns that people raise, it's funnily enough, it's actually not about the police officers who are killers. Although, you know, obviously I'm deeply upset about that. It's not even about necessarily the standards of internal abuse within police forces and coppers being bad uns and all that. It's actually the main area of a lack of confidence from women is a lack of taking their crimes seriously and their safety and security being a priority within forces. So actually the biggest, apart from economic fraud, crime that actually isn't included in the crime data. We don't include fraud in the crime data, online fraud, crime. If we did, the crime would not be falling, I'll tell you that for nothing. But of what is recorded in the crime data, just domestic abuse, not sexual violence, not child sexual exploitation, not human trafficking, just domestic abuse accounts for 19% of all crime that is reported across the country. Some areas it's higher, some areas lower, but on average it is 19%. And the idea that 19% of any police force's resource, I don't even mean money here, although, you know, obviously some of it is about money. I mean, their attention, their focus, their strategic priorities, their will even. The idea that 19% of that is being focused just on domestic abuse is absolutely for the birds. If it was 5% in the best police forces, I'd be happy. And what that is leading to, for me, it's the constant failing of the domestic homicide review. Now, campaigners like myself and many of the people on this call, I see Shaista here, so I'll blame her for this as much as I'm going to blame myself for it. We have made the murder of women a nationally important issue. You know, we have made violence against women and girls a nationally important issue. And the downside of that somehow, actually, in reality, is that now it actually gets reported. When a woman is murdered, it gets reported. And the inquest into her murder often gets reported. The court case into her murder gets reported, and the domestic homicide review findings. And again and again and again, women are now just being reminded about how police didn't follow up the call out, police didn't turn up, police didn't go. She had 19 times that she'd called the police. Now that has peaked into the public interest because we have made violence against women and girls a sort of nationally important issue. And the downside, I mean, that's very good, but the scrutiny on the police because of that is vitally important. But what that has meant in the short term is that we are just constantly reminded that we weren't taken seriously. Like, if you come forward, you won't be taken seriously. Look at this woman. I mean, not the worst, actually. I've seen some pretty bad cases, but one of the worst cases in my neighbouring constituency in Solihull. And if you listen to the inquest, you can hear the call handler when the woman was ringing 999, and she's trying to say to her, I'm a high risk victim. Like, she knows the language. She's saying, I'm a high risk victim. I've called the police lots of times. He's going to come and kill me. And he killed her and her mother there and then. And the call handler, I mean, you know, I make no bones about it. She was racist as well as not being taken seriously that it was, you know, just a woman's crime. And actually that call handler reduced the risk of that woman whilst on the phone, and both her and her mother within the hour were dead. And Like when we hear stories like this, we, you know, it just is a constant reminder that our security is nobody's priority. The risk of our lives is lesser, and that is going to have a knock-on effect. So the police cannot, you know, they can do everything that they can in recruitment, in training, in, like, you know, ticking all those boxes, but until they actually start resourcing and prioritizing violence against women and girls very, very firmly, and it was Labour women who fought for it to be a strategic policing priority. That would not have happened without the strength of Labour women's voices on it. I mean, me and Sarah, we sort of got sick of saying it by the time they eventually did it. But that actually meaning something in practice rather than just agreeing to it is still yet to be seen. But when, you know, we could get a really shiny, clean police force that genuinely just has bad apples rather than bad systems, we could get to that point. And actually, I have hoped we get to that point, but it will mean absolutely nothing to women's confidence in policing. And misogyny won't be at all tackled if it is still just a really crappy response to the crimes that women call the police about, that women are speaking up about. And so, I mean, following up, I know Sarah mentioned already the Louise Casey review, but, you know, the Labour Party is currently, I mean, the Labour Party has pledged to reduce domestic violence in 10 years by 50%. And, you know, it was quite hard to get that across the line, but we knew in our team that if we didn't make it like, you know, this has got to be like a genuinely mission-driven pledge that we're going to reduce it by this much, that when it comes to after the election or even before the election, there's always some big shiny thing that comes along. We have to be held accountable for that. And so some of the things that we will look at around specifically about policing are, you know, like in Louise Casey's review, the idea of having women's safety units in every police force. Does it seem like rocket science, does it? It doesn't seem like rocket science that you should have like specialists in sexual violence in every force, like that every force should have a unit. And this isn't like knife crime, funnily enough. Like, you know, actually I can see that the resourcing of things like youth violence and knife crime has a geographical element to it. Like, I get it, I'm from a big urban city, I get it. That's not the same with this. This is everywhere. This is like, there's no pitch point, there's no Gloucester gets away with it, there's no, you know, like rural Lincolnshire doesn't have sexual violence and domestic violence. You know, every one of the 43 forces has to be taking this as, you know, at least one of their top 3 priorities, and currently that isn't the case. And so that is the work that is going to have to be done. But what I will say in favour of the police, absolutely in favour of the police, and to sort of buck the idea, and it's all well and good slagging off the police, but like I say, you can only slag off the police from a privileged position because you won't have to call them. It doesn't actually help necessarily the women who absolutely are going to have to call them right now whilst we've been on. People have had to do that. What I will say for the police is that they are a tiny fraction in the fight against domestic violence and sexual violence. They're not even 5% of the problem. They are, I mean, so few women actually interact with criminal justice agencies that and if you were to, and even the ones that do, what you would hear from police officers if you were to talk to them is, well, social services are letting them down. Like, I can't get the CPS to make the decision. I have to let the women go back, and they go back to their partners because there's nowhere to house them. And the police are absolutely right about that. They are one partner and they get the blame for absolutely everything, and they're a tiny fraction of the solution. Housing or welfare, for example, is 10 times more important. In fact, immigration, if you're talking in Home Office terms, probably has more of an effect. I mean, maybe less in Gloucester, more in Birmingham. I've got a Birmingham-centric view on it there. But if even from the Home Office perspective, getting immigration right is more likely to get domestic abuse to come down than necessarily what we need to do to change policing. So, and it's probation. There is no probation left in our country whatsoever. There is no offender management. That, you know, so the police, it's quite difficult when we see this. It always ends at the police's door, but they are actually, of all the agencies, the one most soul searching about it at the moment. If only children's services were soul searching at the level. You know, that'd be a bloody miracle. Or the family courts did anything to question themselves. Like, so I do think we have to be really, really careful that we don't just think that the solution is just in policing, is what I would say. Whilst there is huge amounts of work to do, at least they're bothering to take part. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jess, for that contribution. And I do take taking our issues seriously, and that clear reality that that's not always the case. Shaista, are you ready to go?
I am, yes. Thank you, Sophia. And I just want to start by saying thank you to all the sisters who are here. Thank you to Sophia, Sarah and Jess for all your work, and indeed everybody who's doing this work day in, day out. And this is quite a heavy subject matter, as Claire already said in the introduction, so please do take care of yourselves. So I'm just going to start by talking about the obvious thing, which is I come from communities that have historically been over-policed and underserved, and that has not changed in the generations that my families have been present in this country. And, you know, we're having this discussion 30 years on from the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence. We know that a few days ago, the BBC put an investigation out where they named the 6th suspect who has since died. And anybody who watched that documentary could not have failed to have been horrified by the catalogue of disgrace, basically, that the Metropolitan Police heaped on the investigation, and the level of harm that it's created to the Lawrence family and indeed communities who are over-policed and underserved. And I start from that point because 30 years on, we have this Casey review, which is an incredibly powerful document. We had the Macpherson report, now we have the Casey review. And if you look at both these documents together, which I think is really important for us to do that, not a huge amount has changed in terms of the culture of policing. And obviously both these reports were specifically looking at the Metropolitan Police, but we also know that both the Macpherson report and the Casey review have said very clearly that this goes beyond the Metropolitan Police. So for us to be able to hold the police to account, which is what we should be doing in relation to misogyny and violence against women and girls, we have to hold the police to account for institutional racism and for the findings of both these reports, because we cannot, as Jess has said, tackle misogyny and violence against women and girls in its fullest form if we don't tackle racism, if we don't tackle the catastrophic failures of stop and search, and if we don't tackle the lack of trust that people have in the police. Now, we all know that when Sarah Everard was murdered, women took to Clapham Common to hold a protest. That protest was held during a time of lockdown, during a time of the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter protest. And we all know what happened to women when they went to Clapham Common. They were treated in a disgraceful manner. The pictures went around the world. I remember very vividly seeing images on the front page of the New York Times. Now, if that protest was predominantly held by Black women or Black men or people of colour, the tone, the coverage of that protest would have been very different to what we saw, which wasn't great, by the way. So I think we have to be very, very aware of when policing goes wrong, how we are further divided, and how we are the ways in which the sort of narratives around the pushback is designed to further divide communities and not to bring us together. And I think we really need to be aware of that. I also want to talk a bit about, pick up Jess's point, which is the criminal justice system alone cannot tackle violence against women and girls. To be very, very clear, we need a criminal justice system that works, and that works for everyone. It has to start by working for the most vulnerable women and girls, and it has to work for everyone. I think there's some very interesting work being done in the regions where Labour has metro mayors, for example. For example, West Yorkshire is a really good case study of things that Labour can do when Labour gets into power. West Yorkshire has been piloting domestic abuse courts. They've had a successful rate of getting those cases through the court system. We know the criminal justice system is overwhelmed, and it has been for many, many, many years. COVID has created further overwhelm of that system. So I think we need to look at pilots such as those domestic abuse courts in West Yorkshire and work out what the success rate has been. We need to look at how victims and survivors of domestic abuse and other crimes against women and girls, how are they being supported, if they are receiving the care and the support that they need before they enter the criminal justice system and when they've left the criminal justice system as well. So I'd urge us all to take a look at what's going on with Tracy Brabbin's team and to support her work as well, because I think there's some very innovative work being done there as well. I'm here in Oxford, which is part of the Thames Valley, and Thames Valley Police have made VAUG a strategic priority. But as Jess has said, it's very important that it's a strategic priority. But where is the resource then to make it a strategic priority? Police forces up and down the country have also been instructed to develop race action plans. And here in Oxford, the chair of the independent committee that is there to have oversight over the police has called for Thames Valley Police, not just here in Oxford, but across Thames Valley, to really look at how it's engaging with communities. And I've been speaking to the chair, and basically what we're going to try and do is work together along with other stakeholders to ensure that the consultation of the race action plan is delivered in a way that is more open, more transparent, and that is actually involving communities. I'm just going to use up another minute or two just to focus on what I think we can do. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to look at this issue through an intersectional lens. We need to connect the dots. Those of you who are active in Labour Party spaces, please, write to your police forces, ask to hold dialogues with them. We need to get more women as police and crime commissioners. Absolutely, we do. Let me be clear, we need Labour women, just to be clear. We need to support them. We need to support the recruitment of women in those positions. We need to make sure that we see representative women. I'd also urge anyone here to please look at your police and crime panels, look at your stop and search panels, look at the scrutiny panels that are there. Very often we don't get access to that information. I had a meeting with a senior Thames Valley police officer last week, and he was basically saying, please, can you help us find women, help us find representative people from communities to come forward. I really, really welcome that conversation, because we need to be in those spaces and places to work together with a broad section of people to make the change that we need to see. I also agree with what you've said, Jess. The police are on the front line in all ways, and the failures when it comes to providing justice to women and girls doesn't just start with the police. It starts way, way early. It starts in terms of our education system. It starts in terms of how we are teaching our children about how to respect everyone, but particularly women and girls, and it just continues in that way. I worked quite closely with Jess around universities, and some universities were busy trying to get students to sign non-disclosure agreements when they were coming forward, saying that they'd been subjected to sexual violence and rape. And again, this is what I'm talking about. There's an entire system here that needs focusing on. And I will finish up on this one point, which is, as I said, the criminal justice system is not working for anyone. It's certainly not working for women and girls. And a criminal justice approach to ending violence against women and girls or tackling it is not the only approach. Louise Casey talked about the disfiguration of the police force. We have to talk about the disfiguration of our communities. Austerity has gutted communities. It's gutted services for women and girls, particularly minoritized women. And so what we need is a community approach. We need, when Black Lives Matter talked about defunding the police over in the USA, there was a lot of absolute racist nonsense being sprouted about the movement in the US, as it was here in the UK. Now, when we talk about defunding the police, there's a bit of a better idea of what that means. What that means is put resources into communities, put resources in the hands of those individuals and communities and those organizations who've been doing the work day in, day out for decades and decades. And actually the police would they overwhelmingly support that approach as well, because they know that the answer to creating safer communities is in our communities. And so what we need to do is we need to amplify those voices, particularly the voices of women doing the work day in, day out. And we need to lobby to ensure that more resources, which is money, but has to be other resources as well, are funneled in the direction of communities. That's how we keep our communities safe. If you just look at sport is one of the ways to do it, but there's many other ways. And up and down the country, organizations run by women on shoestrings are doing incredible work. And so we need to also make sure that that conversation is added into this wider conversation around policing and misogyny. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaista, for that. And I do take from that, certainly standing for election, but also looking up and talking up the good work that Labour colleagues are doing all around the country. So thank you very much for that contribution. Okay, so we're going to open the floor for questions. Sisters, please put your hands up. If no one's got an immediate contribution, I'll have a look in the chat. So any hands up? Pretty.
Hi, I have put it in the chat already, but what are the reasons why you don't think things have changed? Because if we don't understand those reasons, we are not going to be able to move on, and we will be here 20 years down the line talking about the same issues. So what are the reasons? I mean, I'd like to know some of your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Pretty. Who would like to contribute first?
And I'll go for it if you want. Austerity didn't help. There was definitely progress being made. It's very, very infuriating. I can see Kathy Coe here, who spent many a year in a meeting with me in the West Midlands on these matters. And it doesn't help that, like, you know, so what Shaista was saying about there being specialist domestic abuse courts, well, we used to have those in every part of the country. That used to exist, and now what seems like a trailblazing commitment. It's just like, you know, I worked in a specialist domestic abuse court, and so when the court system was massively cut back and austerity undoubtedly caused that, and whilst there has been from the centre more of a focus on this in the last 20 years than the previous 20 years, undoubtedly, and in fact more centralised. Well, they say there's more centralised funding, there actually isn't, because if you take out the billions that were spent on supporting people, for example, which was basically funding all domestic abuse housing for the 10 years, the 13 years of the Labour government, there has just been a degradation, and actually what hasn't really been mentioned here today in who is actually on the front line of victim support services, and that is local councils. So like local councils are the absolute, like, you know, almost all, and it's sort of got a bit distorted with police and crime commissioners. I have to say, I don't think that's been helpful, particularly because it's like so rape stuff comes from your domestic abuse housing is your local council. That has been confusing and has confused the field a little bit, I'd say, and it means that small organisations have to negotiate with a load of different people and spend half their time filling in paperwork for a million different people, which is irritating. So that has been what has hampered it. I would say historically though, and because most of this movement comes from the women's movement, totally understandably, that actually the thing that we haven't focused on, and it's been to the detriment of how we police in this country, is looking at the offender. And that's because most of this conversation was always trying to protect for victim services, the small bit that was there. And we, you know, and it's not really the responsibility of victims agencies to be doing that work, but there was no one else doing it. So part of the problem, and actually a positive move that I've seen in the last decade, is this idea that we have got to look at systems of offender management and prevention work with violent men and understanding why some men aren't violent. And that has never really been the focus. It's been a sort of sideshow for quite a long time. But that I think, and that, you know, but the police have a massive role to play in that offender management piece of work, and they've never really been expected to do it. And certainly that I think is moving on, and that would be different from the past. But austerity undoubtedly hampered progress. I would say that the peak of it being like we were gonna, you know, we could have got over the curve. In fact, under the last Labour government, domestic abuse did half. Was around sort of 2007. It felt like we were on a sort of upward, we could go over the hill, and it was just smashed to pieces by austerity.
Thank you, Jess. Any more comments from the panel? Sarah?
I could just add briefly on the kind of cultures and the way that the police work. I think we're just behind the curve in terms of change. So when you vet a police officer, historically, it's about your propensity to be blackmailed. So it's about whether you've got debt or whether you've done things in your life that might mean that someone can blackmail you, and that's always been the focus. And the whole system hasn't caught up with the kind of realities around making sure it's not designed to make sure people who are predators don't join the police. It's just not, and it hasn't quite caught up. And what Louise Casey said in terms of those cultures and why we haven't changed over this period of time is that the Met is very defensive. It shies away from opening up its doors, and it's got an optimism bias. So it will announce an initiative, it will do a strategy, and it will think that works. And because it's quite hierarchical, as lots of organisations are, as reports go higher up the line, they become more positive, and people are too optimistic about the challenges that they face and the problems that they face. So there's some real kind of ingrained cultural issues that feed that feed the problems that we've seen.
Thank you. Shaista, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just a quick add on. I agree with everything that's been said. I think the failures around land really about the lack of accountability. There's a fundamental lack of accountability in these systems that really will hold senior people to account.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to switch to questions in three. So I'm going to take Alison, Tasha and Davina first. Marie, Hoden and Gemma, I'll come to you second. Alison.
Thanks, Sophia. Greetings from sunny Scotland tonight. It's really great to be part of this debate. I just wanted to bring in a couple of points relating to the wider social context to the issues that we're talking about tonight. A couple of our MSPs, Paula McNeill and Katie Clark, they've been undertaking a consultation on ending violence and sexual harassment against women and girls. And some of the research that they have pulled together, and that has been really eye-opening. And what I'm really thinking about the youth justice end of this issue, where we've seen mounting evidence where harassment and sexual assault in schools, and particularly in high schools, has really increased to the point where, in the survey work that was done by Glasgow Uni, I think 3 out of every 5 high school girl had said they'd been sexually assaulted or touched or verbally harassed in some way. And I'd be interested to hear what the panel think about, where does that fit? Because the youth justice system, and I know Scotland and England are a little bit different, but it seems to me that it's not been taken seriously as a pattern of behaviour in the individuals or in terms of the social context. And of course, these young boys are growing up to not only join the police and other sections of society that we've talked about tonight, they're bringing those values in, but they're growing into men who some will go into offending themselves. So if it's okay, I'd like to just add that component in, how we reach out as part of this attempt to stem the rising problems. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. Natasha?
Thank you, Fee, and greetings from very sweaty London. And yeah, I agree, it really just is horrendous. It's not right. So thank you so much to the panel for your really interesting and thought-provoking comments. I suppose my question is, trying to look forward and trying to see where we're going to go. Are there places either nationally, regionally or internationally that are actually doing a good job, that are getting, no, okay, that's good. But not just around policing, but also as a previous questioner had said, in terms of dealing with violence, the male violence, and trying to change that culture earlier on, so that we're not talking, you know, the police, as you said, Jess, are the tip of the iceberg. They're the kind of last line of defense. Actually, by the time you get to that point, it's almost too late, because they're now having to, you know, pick up the slack for every other service and every other system that's failed. So are there any places at all where we can look to and say, actually, there's good work here, and it might give us a little bit of hope?
Thank you, Natasha. And Davina?
Hi, everybody. So my question really is around this police board that is being recruited at the moment for the Met Police, and just wondering what the panel thought would be the key factors to empower that board to impact London policing in a positive way, especially in reference to violence against women and girls, or perhaps maybe that isn't the remit and there needs to be something else in place. So I'd be interested to know what they thought on that.
Thank you, Davina. So to recap, we've got an increase of sexual assault in schools and the youth justice system. Where are there examples of people doing well, and the Met Police Board, and what needs to be done to empower them? Shaista, would you like to kick off this time?
Yep, happy to do so. So thanks for your question, Alison. As I said in my short presentation, this starts very early on. It starts in schools. I think one of the things that needs to happen is that schools in particular need resource. We can't expect teachers to be taking on more and more work. And about 2 weeks ago, I was speaking at an event organised by Beyond Equality, and we were looking at the issue of Andrew Tate, and they had about 100 school teachers on a Zoom, and they were busy trying to work out how to hold these conversations with young people, how to challenge them on the issues, but also how to challenge themselves as well. So this type of work is being done. For me, I think we have to be very careful. I think we have to be very careful about criminalising young people at a very young age, particularly Black boys and minoritized children, because sadly and horrifically, the signals and the messages that they're getting from society is completely about normalizing violence against women and girls. It's so normal now. I've gone into schools and spoken with young people, and you know, girls have very casually told me about them being sexually harassed and molested on the public transport system as they're going to school. And when they're looking at my face, they're like, "Miss, why do you look like that?" I'm like, "Because I'm horrified, I'm speechless." A couple of girls said to me, "Miss, it's normal." I was like, there is nothing normal about any of this. I've also spoken to young people who, you know, they've opened up to me, and they've asked me questions about, "Miss, is it okay for me to have pornography on my phone?" We're talking about 9-year-old boys, and I'm like, no. And then I've explained to them, you know, why it's not okay. And I've explained to them that you cannot be passing on pornographic images. And I also said to them, what kind of pornography is this? Is it, you know, children-based? What is it? They were quite surprised that a hijabi woman wants to have these conversations with them. And what I found is just a real openness from young people to have these conversations once adults create safety for them to have these conversations. And it's through dialogue and discussion that we get to start moving things forward, right? So I really feel very strongly about that. And I don't think we can dump more work on our teachers because they are overworked. We need to work together collectively as a society to tackle these issues. The board, Natasha, your question about the London board is an excellent one. I don't think we need to have more and more boards. I think we need to have a representative board, a diverse representative board that is going to be equipped to hold the Metropolitan Police to account on policing in London. And within that, there needs to be focus on the issues that we're here to talk about this evening. Because, as I said in my presentation, violence against women and girls, misogyny in the police force is not a separate silo issue. It feeds into wider issues around racism, around homophobia, you know, all those issues. And I think what we need to start doing is look at these things through an intersectional lens. And I can't remember what the last question was, Sophia, but I think I've spoken enough. So I'll stop there and pass the baton on to another sister.
Thank you very much, Shaista. You had me rushing for the unmute button then. Sarah.
Yeah, there's a lot there, isn't there? I mean, obviously, youth justice issues are, you know, really, really important part of this picture, and from a slightly kind of different angle in terms of what you do about young men who are perhaps becoming violent or perhaps becoming involved in crime, there isn't, and this is the other part of the mission that Cllr has set, which is to halve knife crime. There is no plan for the group of vulnerable young people that include people excluded from school, persistently leaving school, being arrested, parent in prison, domestic abuse in the home, or leaving care. There is no plan for these groups of people who are very vulnerable, and if there was, then we could intervene. You know, there is loads of evidence about what works. CBT helps people, to handle their emotions, to handle their anger, to deal with it. There's loads of evidence around education programs that work in terms of reducing violence and misogyny. So, you know, programs in schools that teach people what the signs are to look out for abuse and for violence, how to be an ally, how to call out bad behavior. There's a whole raft of things we can do, but at the moment everything is piecemeal. We're spending money all over the place, and nothing is joined together. There's so much to be done, and there is good practice, Natasha, in you know, a lot of areas in terms of policing, in that we have 43 forces. Some of them do some things really well, some of them do them shockingly badly, and you look at the differences in satisfaction within policing, at their vetting results, all kinds of things. They vary wildly, and so that's what we need to fix with a really robust approach nationally. And the police board is really interesting, and I don't have an answer for this because accountability is clearly not there, and I think the police board is a good thing, but that's not going to give you accountability at the hyper-local level. And we need something that makes the police accountable hyper-locally, particularly in large urban areas where each BCU area in London is bigger than other entire PCC areas in England. So you've got vast populations and you know, very hierarchical structures. So there's something about making the board work in terms of visibility, in terms of the mayor's going to be on it, you know, it's going to be much more high profile. Those things are all good, but I don't think that's going to deliver the accountability that we need, and I don't have an answer for that, and we're thinking about that. So if anybody has, please do get in touch.
Thank you, Sarah. Jess?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been on loads of police boards over my time of varying, you know, whether it was before we even had police and crime commissioners, or when we used to sit in a room with 700 people in that weirdy room that we were meant to be accountable. Can't say it was accountable. I was the chair of the police board in the West Midlands when we did have police and crime commissioners. Useless. So yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I am going to become more hopeful in a minute, but what I know about the Metropolitan Police, I'm sorry, I try at best to be willfully ignorant about things in London. So I'm going to agree with Sarah. She's a London MP and she knows much more about it, but I've never seen a police sort of accountability system that I thought was any good to date. So let's hope that we can create one in the future where there is good practice. So Shaista already mentioned West Yorkshire, and there is some brilliant stuff going on in schools. Last night I was giving out awards with an organisation called Tender, who do really good stuff around healthy relationships in schools all over the country, and I gave an award to a man who was from West Yorkshire. He was a Muslim bloke, and his 2 teenage sons had come down to London to this award ceremony, and they came on the stage and watched their dad, who was a school teacher, get an award about violence against women and girls. And I honestly felt like my heart was going to bloody burst. Like this is so lovely. Like, and I had to sort of get his sort of slightly gawky teenage sons to come up. No offense to them, I've got 2 gawky teenage sons. Teenagers are gawky. That, you know, like there is there is like pockets of good practice everywhere. There is no country that's got this particularly nailed. I think Canada has some better legislation than us. Australia has some amazing projects that they're working on, and I'm meeting with some of the people that are there in France. That the best law in that, well, it's just the best named law in the world. It's called horrible sexist, like horrible sexists. Where they fine people for like being sexist on the street and stuff with civil orders. I don't know how successful it is. They must be giving out a lot from my experience of hanging around in France. So there is no place that has this particularly nailed. What I would say, and the West Yorkshire example is a really good one, and it is entirely because not just of Tracy Braben, but the woman who is her police and crime commissioner, who is just a totally legendary woman. And the solution to this going forward, and something that I have been hoping to create within the Labour movement, is, the good practice in Birmingham, for example, that is that we have public health commissioning. When we commission drug services and we commission sexual health services, I insisted, because I was one of the commissioners, I insisted that they had to commission sexual violence services, and I insisted that in drug services they had to commission trauma services for people who'd suffered abuse, and that was the reason that they'd ended up with substance misuse problems. And that's the only place in the country that has that, and that is entirely because I was on the board. It's as simple as that, and that's not just to blow my own trumpet. And the reason that in Oxford they will have progressive stuff in their council is because Shaista is on the council. We need to get a group of expert women who are expert in this field. Kathy is a councillor, for example, and we need to be doing that in local council areas where decisions are actually being made. And maybe LWN could do that a little bit, is sort of get together a group of people and get a woman on every council in the country. And you know what, actually, on the councils that are mainly Tory, there are some brilliant Tory women. There's a brilliant Tory woman in Plymouth who's done amazing work since the misogynistic killing there. I really feel like we need to, and if they don't have one, we need to get one elected. We need to get someone elected who's worked in the field in every single council, and it genuinely would make a difference. Those councils are much more likely to pass regulation and commission properly in their own areas, and that is genuinely the solution, I think, to some of this.
Yes, Sophia, can I just comment in really quickly? I totally agree with you, Jess. In Oxford, we're looking to set up a VOG, cross-party VOG task force. I know motions have been passed in Manchester and other parts of the country as well. And what you've said is spot on. We have to collectively work together with women who understand, and men for that matter, who want to move this work forward. Thank you,
Shaista. Right then, it's hit 9 o'clock. I've got had 5 questions up, someone's changed, so I'm going to go to the last question. So please be quick, 30 seconds if you can, get it in quickly. And speakers, I'd love to ask you if you might kindly include your closing comments in those responses as well, please. So Marie, Hoden, Gemma, I'm then going to go to Minnie and Jackie. Did you have your hand up before? You don't want it up? Okay, lovely. Marie.
This is quite a difficult question.
I can't hear you.
I've lost sound, Marie.
Yeah.
We can't hear you. I'll come back to you. Hoden?
Sorry, hi, thank you. I just want to add 2 quick questions. I won't be long. It's actually nice that we have this event. So my question is, Jess, you've made a point earlier and you said it's not just a police issue, it's all about the other agencies that's involved. So my question is, how can we work together to improve the coordination and the effectiveness of all the relevant agencies involved in tackling violence against women and girls? And my second question is, how can we effectively encourage women to report incidents to the police when there's a clear lack of trust in the system? Thank you.
Thank you. Marie, can we hear you now? No. Gemma?
Thank you. So my first part is about, I think the Tories have been focusing too much on recruitment when we should be looking at retention, because we are losing so many experienced officers like myself. I left the police force and morale is at an all-time low. Policing isn't a 30-year career now, how it used to be. We've got a lot of young, inexperienced officers who want to drive on blue lights, but maybe not deal with a rape, survivor of rape or domestic abuse. when I worked in domestic abuse, it nearly broke me. It's relentless. There's constant offenders and victims. Officers don't have the time they should have to put into those people. And also my second part is, why is it so hard for us women to get into roles? Sort of my local crime and police panel is made up of 13 members, all males. And I want to stand as the Police and Crime Commissioner for my area in Bedfordshire. However, to do that, I'm going to have to leave my job, my secure job, because I work for a local authority. 78% of local authority staff are females. It's a constant barrier to try and get in to these positions. I'm in the perfect position now and I've got brilliant experience. And Jess, one day I'm going to work with you. So yeah, thank you. It's lovely to speak to you all.
Thanks, Gemma. Minnie?
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm Minnie Mangat from Leamington Spa. It's great to have this dialogue today, and you know, it's great to have the conversation. My question really is around, you know, what role would you say that data collection and analysis can play in sort of identifying patterns of male violence against women and girls? And I guess it's like, how can this data be effectively utilised to hold the police to account? And also I just wanted to say that, you know, I really support the fact that, you know, we do need more women, particularly in the police crime commissioner roles, because, you know, the holding to account, you know, particularly in this area that we're talking about, a massive, huge issue, is so important. I'll shut up now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minnie. Kathy?
Hi, Kathy Cow from Staffordshire. Thanks, Jess, for coming and speaking to our team of councillors last week. It was brilliant and you made a huge impression. We need you to go to every team of councillors. There were two things that we did at Pathway, which was the organisation I set up. I'm retired now, but actually I'm not retired because I'm still really there. I just don't get paid anymore. But we set up a family justice centre. And we brought in a partnership approach. So we had people based with us, like we had the police, and actually we worked in police stations as well. We also had addiction services, we had sexual health services, lots of people who were dealing with abuse who could bring something different. The reason we did that was because of a lovely woman, a really brave woman, who I'll call Louise, who she'd separated from her husband and he moved out to live with his dad. But one night when she'd put her two boys to bed, he broke into the house wearing a balaclava, carrying a knife. Obviously, she recognised him from his voice, and you know, he raped her anally, orally, vaginally with the knife to throat, and told her he was going to kill the two boys and then kill her. She was petrified. She did call the police when he left, but she didn't tell anyone else until a couple of weeks later when she realised she couldn't live in that house anymore. She was too scared. And she went to the local housing office and broke down. She came to speak to us at that point. And what was awful about her situation was that she had to tell her story to 17 different people and relive it 17 times. In our family justice centre, she had to tell her story once, and the notes were there for every organisation with her permission to see them. That worked fantastically until austerity, and then our money was reduced dramatically, but not just ours. The other organisations who were with us lost their funding and had to remove their staff, which Kathy, they didn't want to.
Kathy, sorry, my love, just because of time, could you?
Yeah, it's fine.
No, have you got a question?
No, I just wanted to say that, you know, that's what works.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Okay, so just to wrap up, we had agency collaboration, increasing reporting women in positions of power and why it's so difficult. And also the women's protection team structure was the question that wasn't able to be asked earlier because of sound. And we've got family justice as well. So thank you for that. And I'll hand over to Jess first.
So Kathy is exactly right. And the coordination question, co-located teams working operationally on the front line are really, really important. And they were just like, you know, it just ended up being just the women's sector that were left in the end, because social services had to pull out and the police had to pull out, etc. Certainly at the beginning of austerity, the A19 and the police officer, to the point that Gemma made, the A19 literally got rid of, which was the basically harvesting off of police officers who'd worked for more than 30 years and basically sacking them. Because you can't sack police officers, you can't make them redundant. So the A19 was used, and in Birmingham, it got rid of literally all of the corporate intelligence of the entire working of rape and sexual violence and domestic abuse for the previous 50 years. And it was absolutely heartbreaking. And yeah, the sort of rookie police that have been put back in place, it's just like, bless them, they just couldn't possibly do the work that good experienced officers. However, I don't just think that co-location, if co-location ends up being the answer that the Labour Party comes up with, I'm almost willing to shoot myself for the sake of the fact that I cannot believe that the same solution, it is definitely the solution, but it has to go higher. It has to be that the same level of working and partnership and importance of this issue has to go further than the frontline worker. And so actually, to me now, certainly post the Casey review, one of the answers of the coordination has got to be people like Cathy working in the police station. So Sarah and I went over to the terrible police station where all the racism happened, Charing Cross. Yeah. We went over to Charing Cross police station, and we were talking to the officers, and this one officer was like, oh, I just had a DV case. And literally, I just pushed back on everything that he said about this DV case while I was in there. And he was like, oh yeah, okay. We need experts who aren't coppers in management positions within the police as well. And we need that, not just within the police, but we need experts like that in social services, in the housing office. It's not just on councils where that's going to matter. We have to co-locate the power as well. So that's one of the things about the coordination. Data collection, I think actually if there's anything that has been hampered the most in policing austerity, it is analytics. Analytics just doesn't exist anymore in policing. So if you ask the Home Office for any data or any police force for any data, you might as well piss in the wind because you won't get any. And we have lost a mass, obviously frontline coppers is the politically expedient thing to do always, but without the analysts and the data and the researchers that sit behind that work, you end up with absolutely naffle progress. You just maybe more people doing the basics, and it's like that's not helpful either. And so data collection is wildly important in that regard as well. I'll let the other people answer the rest of the other questions that I didn't answer.
Thank you, Jess. Over to Sarah.
Thank you. I think you answered most of them, and I agree with everything you said. Gemma, I hope you do stand to be a PCC. We definitely need more women, and we hopefully, having done so badly last time, we are in a position where we will do a lot better this time in terms of the election. And you're absolutely right about retention. We have this kind of very inexperienced workforce, exactly as you say, who want to go out. I go out with response teams, and everybody wants to be on response. Or to go hunting, as they called it when I last went. We don't have the expertise anymore, and there's never been any kind of workforce planning in policing. So this ridiculous, we're going to cut 20,000, then put 20,000 back, as if that can happen without huge damage along the way, is ridiculous. And it's about all those police staff as well, as Jess says. You need the analysts, you need the vetting people. One of the reasons why vetting is so terrible is because they've massively cut back on the numbers of people who are vetting the police staff. So yeah, there's a huge job to be done, and retention is really key. And Louise goes into this a lot, but you look at what happens to women in terms of leadership positions, you look at what happened to black officers in terms of progression, it's just not there. much more likely to be disciplined, much more likely to leave the force earlier. There's all kinds of sort of systemic problems within that as well. So I do hope you do stand. Sounds like you've got really good experience, and I just agree with the points that everybody else has made. There's huge expertise clearly in this meeting, and we're obviously heading towards party conference where there'll be announcements on policy, I suspect, and then it'll really all be downhill towards the election. So you know, now is the time to feed in thoughts and good examples and expertise, and we really would welcome those, because we are at that point where we're, you know, really hungry for ideas of where things have worked and evidence so that we can pull this together. And I just end by saying Yvette talks about there being 4 pillars in the Home Office, and I think that's really important. At the moment you've got kind of policing and immigration and what's the other one? Oh my gosh, my brain has gone. She wants violence against women and girls to be the kind of 4th pillar, and I think that shows the kind of intent of where it fits. It's way beyond just policing. It's and you know, and if we can have a structured approach to how we do these things, then that could be completely revolutionary.
Thank you, Sarah.
But there won't be any money. That's the other challenge that we always have to leave with. There won't be any money because the economy is absolutely tanking, and you know, that is going to be a real challenge in itself. So how we can reorganize the structures, use the money that we've got much better, which I think we can do, is going to be the thing we have to do first.
Thank you, Sarah. Shaista?
Yeah, so Hodden, you asked about how we encourage more women to report to the police when the trust in the police is at an all-time low. I don't think we can encourage all women to report to the police. It's not safe for women to do that. But what we can encourage women to do is to reach out and seek help, because help is available, as we know. And where there are police forces that we know are sensitive and going to listen to victims and survivors, then of course we need to encourage them to do so. Gemma, I agree with everything that everyone said about you. Please stand. It's very, very challenging as a councillor to make ends meet generally, but I'm here to support you. We all are. Let us know when you want to launch your campaign. I'll come up to Bedford. It's not very far from Oxford, but please do it. I'm on the police and crime panel. It's all white. I'm the only person of colour on there and the only woman of colour, okay? So please, sisters, I said it before, Jess is right, it's not a perfect setup, but it is the one that we have. So please show up, because it really, really matters. And then on data collection, yeah, I mean, lots has already been said. The KC review is full of data collection. She's put the Met Police on 2-year notice now to implement the findings and the data, and indeed she's going to be visiting other police forces around the country as well to see what they're up to. So I think that's really important. But yeah, we need data, but we also need to act on the data. And Kathy, thank you so much for your work, and indeed everybody else here as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shaista. And at this point, I'm going to say thank you to everyone for the amazing contributions you've made tonight. A special thank you to Shaista, to Sarah, and of course to Jess. A huge thank you to Claire and Jane for organising the event, for training us all up. And at that, a shameless plug, because there is a vacancy, I believe, Claire, at the LWN if you want to join a fantastic team. So thank you everyone tonight from me. It's been wonderful to be part of this event. I've learned a lot this evening, so I'm encouraged looking around this room.
Thanks to you as well, Sophia.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Good night.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Night.
Bye.